Welcome to the Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 Intelligent Intranet. I'm Chris McNulty, here with my Partner Edition co-host, Mark Cashman.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's always great to partner with you, and I think this episode is going to be an excellent one.
At Microsoft, as we like to say, our mission is to help individuals and organizations achieve more. And that's not a mission that's unique to Microsoft. We need our partners to help us deliver that achievement value to our customers. So each month, we sit down with a different partner who helps us with that to learn their story and to hear through the customer's own experience what that journey looks like.
So on this next episode of the Microsoft Partner Series on the Intrazone, we're talking with our partner Noorez Khamis from Creospark in a special conversation with Denise Strong, Director of Information at the Special Olympics Canada, who is a Creospark customer.
You know, it's really interesting. When I saw that we had Special Olympics Canada coming up, every organization is special, no pun intended, but I do think that there's a lot of things about Special Olympics Canada, especially from a technology perspective, that I think are going to sound familiar to a lot of our customers. That it's not a crazy, complicated environment, and it's not a single unified system. There's some separation and there's complexity and real things that they need to navigate with that.
Yeah, and I think what we know going into the conversation is that as a part of the Special Olympics on behalf of Canada, but also connecting with a lot of partners, both up and down the breadth of the Special Olympics, there was a need to centralize and really to bridge some of the gaps that they didn't have in place for an extranet for how they would work with those partners. And this is both during the Special Olympics events and, of course, throughout the year. And we know that they worked with a number of our partners, the one that we're engaging with in this episode, with some others that helped them bolster that. And I think it'll be really interesting for people to hear their special use cases in terms of how they leverage Microsoft 365 technology. But I think first you'll really be interested to hear how they bridge that gap to get where they need to go based on where they were with, you'll hear some competing technology and, for lack of a better way to describe it, just a little bit less organized, knowing that they needed a little help to nudge in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think every organization can be a disorganization if you look hard enough. I mean, even at Microsoft, we centralize where we keep our content. It shouldn't surprise anyone that SharePoint is huge and OneDrive is huge at Microsoft. But then there's still these islands of specialty transaction systems that have their own file store, or, not every system that Microsoft runs internally is actually built by Microsoft. So I think the need to connect and integrate is pretty common. And I think that connection is really interesting when you think about, Creospark's customer here. Special Olympics Canada, I love their tagline, describe themselves as an inclusion movement powered by sport.
Yeah, and you can tell, I think probably everybody in their own line of work can think through, what is our tagline? What's the best way to describe what our goals are and how we work together? And both you and I, maybe starting with describing the technology, have talked about the value of bringing people together, obviously bringing systems together to support people working together. And I do think that and I think what you'll hear in the conversation when we talk with Denise and Noorez, is that the goal was to bring together people so they can more easily work with that goal in mind for inclusivity. And that really a big part of what they do is they really focus on sport, but it's the movement that benefits the people that they work with, those that are the Olympians. I think there's a lot that we will pick apart. And from a partner perspective, we get a 2-for-1. I think we'll hear a lot about Creospark, but you'll also hear a little bit about the role that Valo played in helping them establish that extranet.
Yeah, and I think it's a testament to the kind of value that our partners bring. The risk, seeing this now that I've been on board at Microsoft for 6 years, is when you have what we call the blue badge, you start to see everything from that Redmond perspective. Like, what other solutions could there ever possibly be? I think it's really common for organizations to find that they've got information spread around, they've got multiple vendors, and there's pros and cons of each, and being able to get an informed but unbiased perspective. I think it's great that Creospark's able to do that for our customers, and really look forward to hearing more about what this journey has been like for them.
So let's turn our attention to hear more of all the details and a lot of the behind the scenes of where they were and how they got to where they are today, and hopefully hear a little bit about where they want to take it next. Let's take a moment to listen to Noorez and Denise and the conversation between how Creospark supported the Special Olympics Canada get to where they are.
So, up next today on the Intrazone, Mark and I are really pleased, as we mentioned before, to be welcoming in Denise and Rez from Special Olympics Canada and from Creospark. Denise, Rez, welcome to the Intrazone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Before we dive in, Denise, can we learn a little bit about your journey into the Special Olympics Canada and maybe a little bit of your background?
Sure. My far background was actually in film festivals, managing film festivals. And what I started to find in that time was that I was always attracted to and always ended up being given projects where I was collecting data and figuring out how to arrange it so that we would be able to get information back out of it later. So after doing that for a while and then deciding that I wanted to get even further into the charitable sector, I moved on to an organization called Right to Play. At Right to Play, I ended up working on a number of projects where I was responsible for designing systems for tracking participants and in the field and that sort of thing, and then tracking financial information and that sort of thing. And just through my experience doing basically business analysis and project management, I ended up taking over IT at Right to Play. And then when the position came up at Special Olympics Canada, where they needed a bunch of things developed, it was kind of the ideal project for me. So I went to Special Olympics Canada, and now I'm the Director of Information Systems.
So it started way back at a film festival. You've talked about designing systems that a lot of other people value, but I also heard that you value helping others and giving others the support and the chance of what they're wanting to accomplish or to give, and now maybe facilitating the systems that help those move forward. What was, one of the special projects that you worked on at the film festival that was maybe that spark that maybe then got us to Creospark?
Previous to the film festivals, I had actually worked in the for-profit industry for a couple of years at John Deere and realized that I didn't want to work in for-profit. So that's how I ended up getting into film festivals. And then when I was at the film festival, I realized that I wanted to do more to help people. It wasn't enough to just be in the charity sector. I wanted to be in the charity sector and helping people. So I went to my boss with an idea to work with inner city youth and help them to learn how to take their ideas and put them down on paper as a script, and then how to use film and video equipment to turn it into a film, and then teach them how to use editing equipment so that they could edit their films. So it was a fantastic project that we ran for a few years that was helping inner city kids basically get a voice and produce films that helped express their voices. So that was kind of my first foray into wanting to help people directly. And then after that was when I found out about Right to Play. I hadn't heard about them previously. And when I heard about them, they were kind of ideal for me to move on to next, working with children in various regions of the world.
That's great. That's really, really nice to hear.
When I was at Right to Play, I worked with a woman that was involved in strategy development and that sort of thing. And she was amazing. And she left Right to Play to go to Special Olympics Canada to be the CEO. Her name's Lindsay Glasgow. And while she was at Special Olympics Canada, she actually asked me a number of questions about how to set up IT in the organization. And they didn't have very many systems set up. And we worked together on it just, kind of casually. And I helped her write up a job description for the kind of person that they needed to put in place. And at the time, Lindsay had said, they don't have the funds to actually create this position. So I was basically just creating the job description for her for the future. Let's flip ahead a few years, and Lindsay had left Special Olympics Canada. And then a friend of mine forwarded me a job description and said, "Hey, I know you're pretty happy at Right to Play, but this job looks like it's made for you." And I opened up the job description, and it was my job description that I had written. I was like, actually, I wrote this job description.
There's one little qualifier at the end of the job description that says, and you have to be really good at working with inner city youth to help build short films, especially maybe to get them in a film festival. But whatever, you have to know IT as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it was great. So I put my hat in the ring, and Lindsay had already left the organization by then, but she served as one of my references. So that's how I ended up at Special Olympics Canada, and it was just really exciting to get there because they had a number of projects that they needed to do. They needed to put together, this extranet project. They needed somebody to put together a CRM for collecting data on donors. They needed someone to put together a project to collect data on athletes and volunteers. So and also a new website as well. So it was a lot of projects that I was really, really excited about. So that's how I ended up going to Special Olympics Canada.
That's a nice journey. And I've just taken a note to myself, my future self, write a resume and write a job description that you would like to get and submit that, and then just wait for it to come back to you.
So Rez, you and I have known each other for years. Can you give our audience a little bit of background about who you are, where you're calling from, and how you got started on this fantastic life journey, which is culminating in your appearance on the Intrazone?
For sure. My life journey started back in the .com years. I worked for a company called ubutter.com out of Seattle, actually, in the early 2000s, and which kept on getting bought out by other companies. You know how it was back then, right? So I was actually a developer back then, and VB and ASP back then, I don't know if anybody remembers those legacy technologies. Then I moved to Los Angeles, was a consulting manager for a financial services firm for about 5 years, where we did, financial software in the .NET realm, right when .NET came out. And after that, at that point is really where I got into the SharePoint space, but before it was SharePoint, where I don't know if anybody remembers Site Server and all the early versions of the software. So that's kind of where I got introduced to that, where I moved to. And after that, I've kind of moved around a lot and moved to Toronto. And that's really where I got into SharePoint, and I worked for some consulting companies and became a Microsoft MVP. And I've been a Microsoft MVP for now this year going on 10 years.
Oh, that's great. I want to just throw in one thing that I think you may have skipped over that I'm curious about. Your role at OpenText, and that's maybe going to put Chris on the spot. But Rez, what was the year or so at OpenText, and maybe some of the foundation of how that supports what it is you're doing today? And part of it is that focus of content services, or what was enterprise content management.
Yeah, the story of OpenText, obviously, for anybody who doesn't know, OpenText is one of your competitors and one of the largest content management companies in the world, along with you guys. But how I got to OpenText was through an acquisition. So OpenText acquired one of the consulting companies I worked at here in Toronto called Burnt Sand. And they were acquired because they wanted help with integrating Microsoft technologies into OpenText technologies. So that's where I was working at OpenText, and with their, at the time, LiveLink product, and integrating with all the Microsoft cool SharePoint capabilities there. After all that dozens of years of consulting experience, I decided to co-found Creospark with my partner, Simran Chaudhry, who was originally from Microsoft, who ran the MVP program for Microsoft Canada. If you don't know, Creospark's a Microsoft Gold partner. We're actually a charter member of the Microsoft Content Services program that Chris runs. So glad to be here, Chris. What Creospark, we're all about we help businesses modernize their workplaces, and we do this by integrating Microsoft cloud technologies, such as Microsoft 365, Azure, and the Power Platform. We help our clients, like Special Olympics Canada, help boost their communication, collaboration capabilities, and facilitate this whole modern teamwork, which is especially important now with everybody remote during the pandemic.
Just a couple observations there. First, just to realign this, although, we do have a little bit of a rivalry with OpenText, I'd like to describe it as co-opetition. So there's places where we compete, but also places where we're actively making sure that we're working together to deliver the best solutions to our customers.
Because I love it, I'm going to read verbatim one of the things that you have written about Creospark. And this is probably why you didn't have to write your own job description. You just sort of woke up from a dream. It says, Creospark was established from a dream to create a different company, to deliver quickly and effectively, to facilitate the right change, to support people, and to give back. So this blend of obviously this conversation and how you are both, and of course the groups of people that you're working with, working together, sounds like a really good match, both for knowing IT and supporting, helping others and giving back. So it's really nice to have you both on the show. I think if we move beyond what was the connection of, I think we used to call it CMIS, bringing systems together, let's talk about bringing Creospark and Special Olympics Canada together. And Denise, I want to start with you. There was a world before Creospark, and it was dark and it was dangerous. Can you just describe a little bit about the systems that you had in place and what you were working towards before you reached out to Creospark, just to give us a little foundation of the services, systems, and really more how people were starting to leverage what you had in place?
Yeah, absolutely. So the environment that we had at Special Olympics Canada before Creospark was when I first started at Special Olympics Canada, we had a SharePoint site that was intended to be used as a centralized location for our chapters to go and get information. But it wasn't set up. It wasn't architected well. It was kind of set up without a project in mind. It was just kind of organically set up. So it was completely unused. So we deactivated it. What ended up happening after that was that each department and each person in each department started to set up Dropbox accounts. So there were Dropbox accounts everywhere across the organization, and none of them were, sort of registered, for lack of a better word, with the IT department. So we had no control over these Dropbox accounts, and people would just create them. They would put data into them, put documents and stuff into them. And then if they left the organization, that Dropbox account would just kind of languish and kind of fade into the background. Chapters still didn't really know where to go to get information. They would go to one Dropbox account and then the other Dropbox account. And if they didn't find what they were looking for, they would end up emailing people and asking them for the information, and then they would get an email back. So it wasn't working, and it wasn't secure in terms of, we didn't have a place where we had everybody's passwords so that we could access it if they left the organization. It was just kind of a free-for-all for Dropbox accounts. The sport department at Special Olympics Canada had come to us and said, we really need a place where we can put all of our information. They went through a process where they actually kind of did this all-encompassing project where they got all of their stuff together in one place and had table of contents for the whole thing, and it was hundreds of pages long. It was great. It was so well organized. And so basically what we needed to do was take that information and put it into a SharePoint site so that it would be usable by the chapters. So we went out and we did an RFP and found a company to work with, and they kind of ended up approaching it the same way that the original SharePoint site was done. It was very much like, what do you want done? Okay, we'll build that exact thing. And it was very inflexible. And we were having problems kind of, moving forward because it wasn't a very good site. We ended up then getting a bit of intel on Creospark from an existing vendor that we really trust. And so we called Creospark, and then they came on as a partner, not as a vendor. And so what they did was, they looked at what our needs were and said, well, what about this? What about that? And really pulled information out of us to help us understand what our needs were, and for them to help figure out actually what you're asking for is this, but what I think you actually need is this. And that's what we actually really needed, because we're not SharePoint experts, they are. It was really amazing to work with them. And it was exactly the kind of relationship that I was looking for, where, it wasn't us coming up with every single piece of architecture. It was them coming up with the architecture and coming back to us and saying, so this is what the result is. Does it fit what you guys need? It was much better.
Put you on the spot a little bit about that. One of the things, one of my favorite quotes from Henry Ford was, if I just gave people what they told me they wanted, I would have given them faster horses.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And so the nice thing about our partners, especially, partners like Creospark, is they have a much broader remit. Like Microsoft, we have a range of solutions. You tell us what you need, and we're going to give you a Microsoft solution from it. But they get to look a little more left to right to suggest things that might not be directly driven by a Microsoft product. What's something that you kind of learned through that process that you might not have known that was even possible in your interactions with the Creospark team?
I think just that the idea that we had for what we wanted to do, just to give you a little bit more detail on what we wanted, was we wanted a place where our chapters, which are their own entities, their own organizations with their own tenants and everything, we wanted a place for them to come where they could use their own credentials to get in and access information that's in a logical framework, so that they could find things and it wasn't, bewildering for them to find it. Then a secondary part of it was that we also wanted to eventually bring in volunteers and have a place where volunteers could go to find things. But we didn't want to have two different sites. We wanted to have one site that had an architecture in it that made sense, and that basically when you logged in, the volunteers would see the same thing that the chapters would see, but there's some information in there that only the chapters can see and the volunteers can't see. So we kind of wanted to have the best of both worlds. And I said it to them because I realized that they were that kind of organization, that they were going to come up with something that would fulfill the need, and not just build exactly what I was describing. That was something that I was surprised about, that we were able to build that, because the company beforehand hadn't been able to build that for us. So I was surprised about that was possible to build something that was that complex and that flexible kind of thing. So that was something that I guess I learned from Creospark.
And Chris, if you want me to put it a little bit more technical terms, at Creospark, it's really important on the planning and design phases where we look at the entire holistic information architecture. So that includes everything, how the library is set up, how the sites are set up, how teams are going to be used, and all the stuff that you guys practice and preach all the time, the two of you especially. And then the coordination with that, with the security architecture. And that's where, by helping Special Olympics Canada understand those two aspects, we're able to organize it in a manner that made sense for their users.
What were some of the first architectural plans that you put in place? And we selfishly know that there were some other partners that you leveraged to help with the build out. Starting with Rez, do you mind just describing your approach to establishing this extranet across the territories for Special Olympics Canada on whole, knowing that there are various chapters?
Yeah, so it started with our business analyst coming in. Her name is Shafina, and she really worked with Denise to really understand the personas that are going to be involved. And Denise kind of alluded that there is a bunch of different personas involved in this project. So that includes corporate, that includes the chapters, that includes the volunteers. And the little bit of a complex part to it is that some of these chapters had their own kind of systems, whether they were on Microsoft 365 tenants or they're on G Suite or they were on their own sets of tools. So we had to kind of normalize all that with the requirements of coming to this main tenant to be able to, have this centralization of content, to have a security model that made sense, to have documentation and content that was accessible to the chapters and possibly not the volunteers.
So I think once you have the foundation of what you're going to do, Denise, on your side, when you see systems coming together, which is the lifeblood of what you described and how you went from your different roles and brought yourself, or should I say, created your own position at the Special Olympics Canada. But when you hear, what your problem areas were, Creospark with the solutions and how they were going to put it into place, can we jump ahead to the state that you're in now? How is it working across the chapters? If you were to look ahead at the next bigger event or the next point in time that you will see benefit besides the day-to-day, what does it look like today for the Special Olympics Canada?
Well, it's fantastic. We're doing a phased rollout of the project. So we started with the sport team. They were the ones that originated the project to us. So they have rolled out now to all of their contacts in the chapters. And the feedback that we're getting back is that the chapters love it. They are loving that they can go and they know exactly where to go to find all the information on sport. And the architecture makes complete sense to them. So they're able to find stuff quickly. And everything is right there. And then, we also did a Teams tenant as well, so that there's a chat module there for them to use if they do have questions to ask some of the sport team, where to find something or if there's something that's missing from the site. So the next thing that's coming up is that we're going to be releasing marketing communications and information systems. So those two departments are going to go at the same time. We're going to launch at the same time. We're not sure exactly when that's going to happen yet, just because with marketing and communications, they've had a few different things that have come up in the last little while that they've kind of been pulled into. So it's probably going to be in a couple of months before we launch them and ourselves. But that's kind of our next big hurdle is getting them out. So we're really looking forward to that. There's going to be some new functionality that we're bringing in, like possibly bringing in Stream into the mix. So we're looking at that right now and figuring out what the needs are for comms. So that's kind of our next milestone.
That's great. Well, here's one little trivia for you that probably won't directly play into what you're going to do with Microsoft Stream, but the connection is both Chris and I have worked for his current manager, my previous manager, Dan Holm, worked for the Olympics around the world in a number of different locations each 4 years, wherever it was. And his role was to make sure that the back-end system that both supported the local crew that would go for, I think, 18 weeks or so and build up a system, use it, and then they would sort of abandon it and move on until the next 4 years. But a big component of that was how are they going to stream the Olympics? And he would work with our Azure Media Services team before it was Microsoft Stream. And now that it's Microsoft Stream, it is that same back end that you will benefit from in the future that has already powered the Olympics in an indirect way.
That's awesome.
So, Denise, I think we're learning a little bit about the Special Olympics Canada, but can you just drill in a little bit more and give us a little bit of detail of the broader structure across provinces and to the international space, but also some of the who you're working with outside of your direct organization, maybe the athletes and others that are working with you and who you are working with throughout the systems?
Sure. At the top of the structure is Special Olympics Incorporated. So that's the international body. And then underneath them are, they call them chapters, and there's country chapters. So each country has their own chapter, and it's divided into groups. There's a North American group, there's an Africa group, there's different groups. But then underneath those country groups in places like Canada and the US, there's also chapters that are, in the States, each state has their own chapter. And in Canada, it's the provinces and territories. So that's how we're structured. But everywhere pretty much runs this very similar programs. Each chapter is responsible for their own exact programming. So there is definitely regional differences and stuff like that. But overall, the mantra of Special Olympics is that we are looking to have individuals with an intellectual disability become more integrated into society. And we do that through sport and play. So it's a really powerful tool to bring people together. In the chapters, for example, in our chapters, there's two streams. There's the competition stream. So that's the Olympics side, where we take individuals with an intellectual disability and help them grow as athletes until they become ready to compete at an international level. That's the kind of commonly known side of Special Olympics Canada, or Special Olympics. The other side, though, that is kind of less well known is the grassroots side. There's lots of programs that are at the individual local level. And what we work with there are anywhere from children that are only a few years old in our Active Start and Fundamentals programs up to people of any age. We have athletes that are in their 90s. So we work with these individuals on a grassroots level just to get them more active. There's many studies that show that individuals with an intellectual disability get less exercise than people without intellectual disabilities. So we're working to combat that. We're also working to use these programs to bring people together. We have a program that's called Unified, and it brings in individuals without an intellectual disability and individuals with an intellectual disability and brings them together to play sports. So it's a really great program aimed at bettering the lives of individuals with an intellectual disability. And that's the grassroots side is actually where the bulk of our athletes come into play. That's where the majority of our volunteers are as well. So that's it's a very large part of our program that people don't necessarily know a lot about.
I can only imagine that once you have what is potentially that direct focus on the primary Special Olympics that we probably all know, but you get the value of people that have the expertise of working with individuals, obviously the systems in place to help support and broaden them out to the grassroots efforts. I can imagine that would start to take hold pretty quickly, if not already part of the charter from the get-go, to really spread the people knowledge and the connection to working with individuals through play and the different grassroots efforts, that would become even if it's not the public face that people know about, that is really the breadth of what it is that you get involved in and the value, whether it's something that we know and see on TV or now knowing it's really that how many people you touch is really, really great to hear. Yeah,
it's an amazing program.
And I can imagine when you're thinking about the rollout and bringing everybody together, now knowing a little bit more of the background, it really is bringing a lot of people together, not just the primary charters, but all the grassroots efforts, however big and small that is across Canada. Noorez, just from your perspective, when you were first brought on and started to hear of what it is that they were looking for and who they were bringing in, I imagine it was a pleasure to know the outcome that you were working towards. Can you just speak just a little bit, connections and bringing people together that was really a spark for Creospark to get involved?
Most definitely. When we first met with Denise kind of came to us with this existing kind of SharePoint setup, and we looked at it and we said, we understand this is an organization that's not-for-profit charity status, and we understand the kind of spot the organization is in. And at that point, like you said about our values earlier, we really wanted to help them in putting up a good solution. And now after we're done, they're just at the tip of the iceberg of what we want to help them with. But we kind of said, you know what, let's give them all of our expertise and run it as if it was a paid big enterprise type of project and go through our entire methodology and what we call our Spark methodology and go through that and talk about the information architecture, talk about all the aspects there that need to be talked about, like the site architecture, the navigation architecture, the Teams architecture, the channel architecture. So all of the aspects we should be looking at in such a project, including the governance. And then we took the approach of, we approached one of our partners, Valo, and we said, this is a great organization and they need our help, and we could get them a little bit further if you were to help with your product, and they would be able to use it right away to facilitate their collaboration requirements with their chapters and their volunteers and corporate. So they actually graciously donated their software to Special Olympics Canada, and with our experience of being a premier partner for Valo in Canada, the only one, we're able to get something up and running fairly fast and usable. And like I said earlier, they're really at the tip of the iceberg. We got a lot of opportunities to integrate Power Platform into their teams, possibly the new DataFlex, possibly all the Power Automate flows behind the scenes to help them automate a lot of their manual processes. So again, they're at the tip of the iceberg. We're going to be deploying, working with them to deploy their sales and marketing and IT next, and meet all those requirements from a content service perspective as well.
That's great. And I will say, Denise, from my Microsoft knowing partners, you got the Creospark and you got the Valo love, which I'm not even being silly. That is a truest statement. That is what you'll get beyond even Mark Cashman saying it in a funny way. You have a really great combination of people and technology helping you.
Yeah, we're really grateful. Very, very grateful. It's been amazing.
The part that I just really want to maybe just validate in my thinking, if I'm hearing it correctly, is the move into where you are now and reaching out to Creospark was for change. And the change was from, we're in a state that we're not happy with and we need to get into a better state to work better. But now you're in that run state, and now you're just thinking of what can we do next? Not what do we need to change next? Where do we need to move to next? So you're beyond deployment, you're beyond migration, you're really thinking about how to onboard additional teams. But I think a lot of that value, and this is the point that I'll just ask to validate, you are now moving forward with growth of the company, but not at an additional cost of IT outside of certainly working with Creospark and some of those investments. But is that true in terms of you feel like you really are in a good state and have what you need from a IT investment?
Definitely. Like I say, we've got an IT services company that is an outsourced company that does most of our IT, and the team that I've got is a fantastic team. Yeah, it's amazing that we're able to launch this sort of project without having to increase our complement of people. The onboarding process is more where we've got input kind of thing, where we're helping people that are having problems getting on and that sort of thing. So that's the most, I guess, labor intensive is the way to say it, is the most labor intensive part, because then once we get them on and they're running, there's no maintenance required. They're running it, and the sport team is able to run their own side, managing their own content and managing what's going on and that sort of thing. And then there's nothing for us to do. So it's fantastic that we are able to roll this out without additional staff.
That's great to hear. Noorez, we want to end on where people can find more about your company, where people can go learn about if there are any times that you're going to be speaking. We know maybe virtually more these days. Anything that Creospark is doing to sponsor an event or anything. And then, Denise, we also just like to end on if there are any main resources that we can point to for people to learn more about the Special Olympics Canada and any events that people can maybe even plug into, even if they're not in Canada. Rez, anything upcoming that we can highlight?
Yeah, most definitely. To get in touch with us, obviously, our website is creospark.com, creospark.com. The events we have upcoming are we're running a whole bunch of App in a Day about the Power Platform and Power Apps. Those are running all across September, and you can go to the Microsoft website to attend. We're sponsoring a couple of SharePoint Saturdays. There's Ottawa on October 17th, where you'll see a bunch of our staff presenting on various Microsoft Teams, Azure, Power Platform, possibly Content Services, Project Cortex sessions, and then also SharePoint Saturday Saskatchewan. That's going to be happening October 3rd. So those are the immediate events, lots of other events, but you can see them on our website.
Well, we'll point people to both the website and, of course, the individual links for the special events that are coming up and with dates and times, and we'll have that in the show notes. Denise, is there anything that we can point people to learn more or to plug in from afar if they wish to?
Definitely. There's our website, specialolympics.ca. There you can learn more about Special Olympics Canada and about our chapters and that sort of thing. There's also the Special Olympics Canada Foundation, and they work with an organization called Motion Ball. And they're having an event coming up that's called Marathon of Sport. And it's a virtual event with Canadian Olympic medalist Tessa Virtue. And so it's happening in September 26th. So I'll send the information through to you guys to post how you can get involved in that. It's a 1-hour event that you can log into from anywhere.
That's great. We will put all that and more so that people can learn more about you, your companies, and of course the events. And for us, for Chris and I, love to thank you for being on the show, sharing what it is that you've done both together and individually. Wonderful work that you both are doing. So really appreciate you taking the time and sharing with us.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Guys.
Up next on the Intrazone Partner Edition, a rarity for us, Mark. A real rarity. We have a commercial? I actually think we have a commercial.
Yeah, think of it as we've got a lot of partners internally, and we love to highlight the good things that people do.
We love seeing podcasts take root around Microsoft and beyond. Our colleagues in the UK are launching a new podcast called Microsoft Stories. It's really focusing on Microsoft's customers and how our technology, left to right, is empowering them to do more. So season 1 of Microsoft Stories is going to look at innovation. 10 episodes, each one about 20 minutes. I didn't realize that was possible.
How do they do it?
I really don't know, but they're going to be focusing on lots of technologies, things that we have never talked about in the Intrazone. Azure and HoloLens and Xbox, along with Teams and Surface, to really push the boundaries of what they can do. And Mark, have you been able to get any guidance about what the first couple of episodes are going to look like?
Yeah, I read into their first 2 episodes that I think will give people a really good sense of what type of Microsoft Stories is putting out there. On September 7th, episode 1 was called Siblings, and this was all about a brother and a sister that set 2 world records rowing across the Atlantic, and they used Teams during the entire crossing to really keep everything that they wanted to in one place, and of course do a lot of their communications as they were crossing the seas. On September 21st was episode number 2, Project Tokyo, and the focus here was a research project out of Cambridge Research Lab that uses the HoloLens to allow blind children to know who is in the room with them. So a really wonderful use of HoloLens, and they really sound like great stories that are just that. They really are focused on probably more the people than the technology, but coming from Microsoft, it'll be rooted in how we're supporting people. So it sounds like a great podcast. And of course, like any podcast endeavor, as Chris and I have gone through, it's really great to put the word out. We really do hope that you listen to an episode or 2 and then subscribe if you like it. We really encourage you to check it out.
So we know you can learn more at microsoftstories.podbean.com. Once again, you've wasted a perfectly good interval of time talking to Mark and me, but fortunately you've been able to speak to our guests, Rez from Creospark and Denise from Special Olympics Canada. We want to thank them very much for coming on today's podcast.
Thank you for their stories. I think it was really great to hear how they're using the technology, and I think also just how they work together. You can check out our show page for links to all of what was discussed today and more, of course. Go to aka.ms/the Intrazone. And if you're interested in other shows by Microsoft, check out aka.ms/Microsoft/podcasts.
You can always send us questions or feedback for the SharePoint engineering and product teams. You can reach us at theintrazone@microsoft.com or on Twitter @SharePoint, @mcashman, or @cmcnulty2000.
If you enjoy the show, and we know that you do, and want to help others find it, please rate and review the show like we are your favorite grandchild. You know, Christmas is right around the corner. So please tell your friends and colleagues about the show, share the SharePoint love, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks again for listening. We're your hosts, Chris McNulty and Mark Cashman, and you've been listening to The Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 partner-powered intelligent intranet.